Still hurts to pick it up and put it down, but by gum, I just played for you the exciting new theme music for Tent Talks Tunes. Yes! I took this thing and I took my fingers and stretched them and flexed them and put them on the neck of the Thunder Lumber and actually plucked out a couple of notes. I will drink a big long draught of Danbury Tap to that. Let's put on the dollar store cheaters and focus my tired eyes on the monitor and see if we can see who's tuned in and who's checking out Tent Talks Tunes right now live on the Facebook. If any of you folks were watching Break On Through yesterday on the Anti-Scene official Facebook page, I was subbing for the regular host, the unimpeachable president for life, Jeff Clayton. And by cracky, I was having some damn problems logging in. Luckily, today has gone a lot more smoothly than yesterday. I'm on time and everything is working in the acceptable fashion. And we got some people tuned in. We got Per from Sweden. We got Bob from Connecticut. We got Ray from Tucson, Arizona. And as we know, there will be others filtering in as the show progresses. Very interesting to see how much reaction I got when I posted today that today's episode of Tent Talks Tunes was going to be about SST. That's SST, which began as one of the most beloved independent record labels on the planet and ended up being one of the most despised. And I, as a dude who was around for most of that journey, first as a fan and a consumer, and then as a dude in the business with my brick and mortar record store, Trash American Style, and nowadays with my traveling record store, Trash American Style, and my online record store, TPOS, I've been able to look at the situation with SST from both sides now, as Joni Mitchell might say. So I just wanted to talk about that. And a lot of people reacted to it. Seems like when you mention SST, you really touch a nerve, either for better or for worse. And as I've been thinking about it all day long before going on air, this could conceivably be a 2-hour show. I mean, this could go on for quite a while. But I decided just to limit it to my own personal experiences with SST and the way I've seen it rise and fall and crest and break. Before we do that, though, we got to check the mailbox and check the bulletin board. The mailbox, as I'm sure we all know, has an address on it. Hopefully you can see the address. Malcolm Tent at TPOS, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. That's where I can be reached via the mail. I was looking at my YouTube channel the other day because, look at that, YouTube channel, Malcolm Tent and Anti-Scene Official. I curate them both. I was looking at my Malcolm Tent channel and somebody left a comment about my presentation style, and the comment was, "Stop holding crap in front of the camera." The only answer I have to that is no. I'm not going to stop holding crap in front of the camera. It's the way I roll, baby. That's my graphic sensibility. That's how I do it. I'm keeping the spirit of cable TV alive, and that means low tech, lo-fi, fly by the seat of your pants, exciting DIY sets, and just let the chips fall where they may. So that's the way we do it. We hold stuff in front of the camera, you read it, I recite it, and we gotta live with it. Cheers, and thank you for the input. So yeah, man, this was a package from my good friend Mr. Miller in Australia. He messaged me and said, I know that you really dig. Actually, I'll read the note. See, isn't this great? An honest-to-God handwritten note written by a real human being with a real piece of art on the back. I love this stuff. You know, digital is great. It's good for what it is. I couldn't do this without the internet. I couldn't do this without digital. But handwritten on a piece of paper, nothing beats it. It says, hey, MT, I know you're the king of insane shit and obscure boots, etc., interviews and whatnot. So here's a whole envelope full of them. Insane shit and obscure boots. This stuff is so insane and obscure, I don't even know what it is. Individual CDs on the Magic Crowbar Deplorable Editions. I mean, the name alone of that label, Magic Crowbar Deplorable Editions. Already I'm hooked. Catalog number Evil 1. Dude, there's a definite aesthetic at play here. No other information. It's a CD. Completely blank. Completely unknowable. Until I actually pop it into the CD player on my next long drive down to the sunny south, which will be for anti-scene business. Here's catalog number Evil 2. Hope we can zoom in on that and get a little bit of a focus on it. So you've got a very good standardized graphic style here. Second copy of Evil 2. There's Evil 1. We got some multiples of these. Thank you very much for sending these to me. The artist known as TG. I will be happy to reciprocate to you very soon some deplorable editions of my own on the cassette and or CD format. I think CD is what I'm going to be sending you soon enough. So thank you for that. Can't wait to hear them. On a similar note, I got an envelope from the rather bizarre and mysterious locale of Cobleskill, New York. And this has some just an envelope that's just full of bits and bobs and scraps of paper, all of which are artistic. Here we've got a little, a takeoff on a Jack T. Chick religious pamphlet. We have a strange screed about teeth and Eternal Darkness Creations. Somebody who wants to trade tapes and trade discs. Love it. And then, look at that. Some art. Marked as being from the Campaign to Play for Keeps. A tract, a propaganda leaflet on cancer for communists. And a theologically breathtaking black and white piece of cut and paste collage art. I love this stuff. I will be sending another envelope from me to Cobleskill with my own selection of strange and unusual printed matter. I got plenty. Hope you enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed receiving yours. So thank you to the committee to Play for Keeps. If you want to indulge in some of this good, fun, fine, fair mail trade stuff, there's the address again. TPOS, P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. I am happy to reciprocate. Let's take a look at the bulletin board real quick. I mentioned that I was going to be on the road to the sunny south. That's not happening for a little while yet, but we've got some events coming up, the focus of which is Scumstock 2022 in Tampa, Florida. Yes, indeed, do. Anti-Scene is headlining a roster of top acts. A Killing Tradition, Without MF Order, The Village of Weedville, and a host of others, as Gordon Soley would say. It's happening in Tampa, November 5th. Anti-Scene's got other shows that are in the works for that very same weekend. I've heard talk of Wilmington, North Carolina. I've heard talk of, well, I'm not at liberty to say what else, but keep an eye right here on Tent Talks Tunes, also on my Facebook page, on the Anti-Scene official Facebook page, antiscene.com. We'll be telling you all about it. But I'm very excited. As we just saw a minute ago, I do have some of the chops back. Here, I'll show you again. For anybody who tuned in late, look at this. I got the Thunder Lumber itself, the Thunder Lumber, which 3 weeks after my surgery, I can play a little bit. The dexterity is definitely not up to snuff. My strength is definitely not up to fighting strength. As far as speed goes, speed is not even on the table yet. But I'm on my way. So I'm very happy about that. And in case you're wondering why, I have gotten some inquiries about this. Check this out. This is the genuine X-ray of what's going on underneath the cast. You can see this is my after X-ray. You can see that there are a number of bones that were removed from my wrist, and the bones that were left are now held together by 2 long titanium screws. And if you look at the surface of the skin, there's a big long incision with more incisions there and another incision there. In other words, they chopped the hell out of me. My doctor took a scalpel and went very skillfully, I must say, and removed all the broken bones that were in my wrist that were unrepairable and fixed the ones that were repairable. So that was almost exactly 3 weeks ago. And the prognosis is good. So that's why I feel comfortable trumpeting the Anti-Scene gig November 5th in Tampa and the other ones that we have coming up. Ironically enough, that very same day in Danbury is the Danbury Record and CD Expo, which I co-promote with my friends at Noise in the Attic. That's Noise with a Z. Noise in the Attic and Trash American Style present the Danbury Record and CD Expo November 5th at an exciting new location, which is the VFW Hall in downtown Danbury. We went down there and scouted the place out. It looked great. It's a VFW hall. It's been there forever. It hasn't changed in probably 60 years, and that's the way it should be. I believe that record shows and a lot of punk rock gigs were meant to be held at musty, dusty, old VFW halls that still have that faint whiff of old cigar smoke from 1972. Even though smoking hasn't been allowed there in decades, you can still kind of pick up that delicate whiff. To me, that's the aroma that should hit you right in the face when you walk into a room where a record show is being held. So I wish I was going to be there. It's going to be pretty dang cool, I think. 35 or so dealers just full of records and tapes and CDs and memorabilia and stuff. It's going to be a good one. You should be there, November 5th in Danbury. I will also make one last plug. I was reminded when I set up at the punk rock flea market in Southington, Connecticut, which I will be doing again in October, that I had copies of this, the great Shake, Wrestle, and Roll LP by the exotic Adrian Street. This album kicks ass. Songs about wrestling by a wrestler. I have copies of this for sale. Cheap, 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 cheap. You want it, you need it, you gotta have it. It's out of print. It is on the disgraced and completely, utterly canceled Burger Records label. Burger ain't coming back. But the evidence that they actually did exist is right here. Sealed stock copy of the exotic Adrian Street. Talk to me, people. I want to hook you up with the vinyl you need. You need it. All right. Normally I'd be clapping my hands and rubbing my fingers greedily. I can rub my fingers. Not doing much clapping these days. Let's get down to brass tacks here and talk tunes. SST. What more can I say? SST. You say those three letters, and people who are music fans, especially those who were around in the 80s and 90s, automatically perk up. For better or worse, for good, for bad, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, SST always commands a reaction. So, just to reiterate, I'm not here to do a World Book Encyclopedia blow-by-blow biography of SST. I'm simply here to relate my experiences with SST as a fan and then as a business dude, and also somebody who is at least, somewhat conversationally friendly with a lot of people who are actually on the label. So this is one man's opinion on SST and how it went like that and how it went like that. The story began one late Monday night in 1981 as I was staying up way past my bedtime on a school night because it was a Monday. The great life-changing radio program Radio Free Living Room was on the air, and I would stay up late on Mondays with my boombox cassette recorder and a blank tape in it with the record button hit and the pause button hit, and the DJ Eric Moss would play music for 2 hours, and every time I heard something that even sounded remotely good, I'd hit that pause button and record the song in question, and then hit the pause button when it was over and wait for the next one to grab me. There was a song that totally grabbed me, had this killer bass line, this screechy, jangly, scratchy guitar, and these really funny lyrics about getting a six-pack. You guessed it, kids. Six Pack by Black Flag. That led to me going to my first ever punk rock show, which was Black Flag at Finder's Lounge in Hollandale, Florida, May 11th, 1982 on the Damaged Tour. That was a show that completely took my brain and made it expand, pretty much against its will. It was literally a psychedelic experience, because the word psychedelic means mind expanding. In that sense of the word, seeing Black Flag was a psychedelic experience. Woo! And I hadn't even bought a Black Flag record at that point. I just knew that one song, And that's the way it worked back then. Maybe it still does now, I don't know. But it definitely worked that way back then. In fact, if anybody who's tuned in right now, any millennials, Gen Xers, Gen Zers, Gen A minus, I don't know what they're up to or down to now, Generation B plus, whatever you are, leave a comment. Whether you're watching live now on Facebook or whether you're watching the archived episode on my YouTube channel. Does it still work that way? Do you hear a song randomly and just decide to go out and see the group in question based on the song or the video or whatever it is? Do people still do that? I don't know. You gotta let me know. I'm 57 years old. I don't know nothing about you Generation C pluses. Y'all gotta tell me something. That's a quote from Jeff Clayton. You gotta tell me something about this. In 1981/82, that's the way it worked. I heard the song, it stuck in my mind. Somebody gave me a flyer that the band was playing in town, and I went and saw the band. And that was it. That was it. It was a lifetime love affair with Black Flag, and thus, by default, SST. So, long story short, the first SST record I ever owned was not this very copy, but the first album by Black Flag, Damaged, and it was on the very short-lived and extremely troublesome and problematic alliance, if you can see that. I'm sure you can make out the basics of it. SST and Unicorn Records. So my original copy of Black Flag was on SST Unicorn. The copy of TV Party that I bought on 7-inch was also on SST Unicorn. And let me just get this back in there. There were promos and things around on SST Unicorn, so that's just kind of how I initially understood SST to be like a partnership with this label Unicorn. It turned out shortly thereafter that Unicorn were not doing right, and SST had to sue, and the resulting lawsuits ended up in SST being tied up in court for a couple of years. And SST got a lot of sympathy points for that. They definitely repped a lot of goodwill because their battle with Unicorn was epic. And because of that, Black Flag wasn't allowed to record new music. They weren't allowed to release music under their own name. SST were the total underdogs in this case, you know, like legit. And they were fighting the good fight using whatever they had at their disposal legally. You know, they did a lot of the legal work themselves. It just went on and on and on, even to the point where, even though Black Flag were not allowed to record or release music under their own name, they went ahead and released an album of Black Flag music, but they excised every reference to the name Black Flag on the cover. Let's see, that is not a Black Flag logo. Nope. Neither is that. That's not the name Black Flag. And if you look on the back, see all those little white boxes? That's all where there were going to be references to Black Flag, but they are not there. Not on any of the flyers. Nowhere. A couple of the bar logos did slip through. And you'll notice it is on SST, not SST Unicorn. So the very act of chutzpah of Black Flag doing this scored them a lot of points. And the fact that Chuck Dukowski and Greg Ginn went to jail for it. Those guys got sent to jail for putting out this record. Think about that for a second. I'm not particularly sure that I'd be willing to go to jail just for the right to put out an album of my music. In fact, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. In fact, I know I wouldn't. If I was handed the decision to either not release the album or go to jail, I would say, I'm not going to release the album. Thank you, please, sir, your honor. Thank you very much. You know, huzzah, huzzah. I would have totally caved. Those guys went to jail to put out their album. That got a lot of points. That got a lot of points. So when it finally came to the day when the lawsuits were settled and Black Flag got the use of their name and they were allowed to go into the studio, and the first post-lawsuit record came out, My War by Black Flag. Loud and proud. Look at the size of that logo on the top of the album cover. Ain't no denying who that is. Ain't no doubting it. You look at the label. Right there. Clear as a bell, plain as day. SST. There is no unicorn. There is no nothing to distract from the fact that it is SST. It is Black Flag. It is a new album. And they hit the road in support of this, and people were ready for them. They were happy to see Black Flag. Of course, as we all know, the reviews for this album were very, very mixed. Very polarizing. Very polarizing. I love this album. Side 1, especially. I love the song Nothing Left Inside, the first track on side 2. The 2 remaining tracks, once again, if given the choice, if I was given a choice to take the song 3 Nights and leave it, I will leave it. In fact, I always do. I don't think I've played that song in 30 years. Scream, that closes out side 2, no thank you. There's a far, far, far better version of Scream on the Rat Music for Rat People compilation album. That's the one that I will listen to if I want to hear that one. But dude, side 1 of My War, woo-wee, smoker. I don't know if they ever fixed it, but I know for a fact that original pressings had Swinging Man and Forever Time in the wrong order. Their places are switched in the running order on the vinyl and the CD and all the subsequent reissues. But that's definitely a first pressing with these song titles in the wrong order. Mine! So yeah, SST is kicking ass and taking names. They're back in action. They got the name. Black Flag is back in action. They got the name. We're talking about like 1984 here, kids. And 84 was a magical year for American punk and hardcore and independent music, and SST was right there. They were at the tip of the spearhead. They were at the vanguard. SST had Black Flag. They had Husker Du. They had the Minutemen. They had the Meat Puppets. They either did have or were soon about to have the Descendants. They had Saccharine Trust. And they had other records they released that didn't have the same whoomp as those bands I just mentioned, but were still really cool. Like Worm, Overkill, The Dicks, a few others. The SST roster at this point was rock solid. And every single one of those bands that were in the A list that I just mentioned were relentless touring machines. They were on the road constantly. They were recording constantly. Every record that every one of those bands released at the time was great. And everybody looked forward to them. Everybody wanted to hear the next Minutemen record. Everybody was dying to hear the next Husker Du record. Meat Puppets were another one of those bands that were very divisive and polarizing, but for those of us who liked the Meat Puppets, we couldn't wait to hear the next Meat Puppets record. And even for the people who didn't like the Meat Puppets, of which there were quite a few, because they betrayed their hardcore roots, quote unquote, there was no denying that every Meat Puppets record that came out was a work of art, from the cover to the music inside of it. And they went out there and they played that stuff, in spite of sometimes very hostile reactions. They never stopped. You had to respect that. If you didn't like the music, you had to respect the ethic. And that was very, very typical of the way SST and the SST bands presented themselves at the time. It was an event. You were almost guaranteed to make your weekly record trip. Your what? Your weekly trip to the record store, and the odds are pretty good that something new and exciting would be in the bins by one of these bands or some related act. And the fact that SST at this time was still completely DIY, still completely roots, still completely sweat of the brow, the stories of them living in the office and sleeping under the desks, this was happening right then and there. If you were adventuresome enough, you could pick up the phone and call SST, and somebody at SST would pick up the phone, and it might be D. Boone of the Minutemen, it might be Chuck Dukowski of Black Flag, it might be Greg Ginn. I mean, it could have been any one of these dudes, Mugger or Davo, all these mythical names that were involved with this group of Huns who were making this stuff happen. There was a real mystique, an ethos, a magic about it. This was like a powerful thing that was going on. And for those of us who were like just getting started with our bands and our labels and, our way of doing things, SST were absolutely inspiring. I'm even happy and proud to admit, as I have a number of times, as I drink Danbury tap water to keep my whistle wet, when Big Santo and I started our own record company, TPOS, we deliberately made our first record catalog number TPOS 001 as a direct homage to SST, because their first record, Black Flag Nervous Breakdown, was SST 001, and they numbered all of their catalog, all of their items 0, 0, whatever, or 0, whatever. For example, My War is SST 023. Black Flag 6-pack, SST 005. The fact that they added those zeros at the beginning of their catalog numbers, to me, indicated that they meant business. That indicated to me that they weren't going to stop, at least until they reached 100. You know, you put those zeros there, you gotta fill them up. The zeros are placeholders. The zeros imply right off the bat that they're going to go at least to 100. I liked that. I liked that a lot. That was my definite bite off of SST in the way they did things, you know? So 83, 84, 85, SST can pretty much do no wrong. By the sweat of their brow, they are promoting this incredible roster of acts. They were releasing not only amazing albums like, just say for example, Zen Arcade by Husker Du, they were servicing radio stations with mind-blowing promo albums like this one, Husker Du from Zen Arcade. Note the catalog number, SST 027. Zen Arcade in its regular stock issue is a double LP. To service radio, they released a single album sampler from Zen Arcade with a custom label. And that's something else about SST that I really loved. When they pressed their records, they used all these really weird off-colors for the label stock. Knowing them, they probably got these weird off-color label stock papers at a discount. God bless them. It gave them a sort of identity. That's on the A side, a number of tracks from Zen Arcade. On the B side, I hope that this is visible in my light. That is, look at that, etched vinyl. They actually etched the Husker Du logo into the vinyl itself. The inner groove where the etching is the epic song Recurring Dreams. And I believe it's Turn on the Radio on the outer groove right there. So it makes a Husker Du logo. And the outer groove plays perfectly. The inner groove makes a sort of scratching noise every time the needle goes over the etching. But you know what? If you're going to promote a record to radio, that is a damn cool way to do it. It took me years to track one of these things down. This one's in the personal collection, not for sale. This came from the library of WXCI, Danbury, Connecticut, 91.7, which at one time was a super powerhouse radio station in Danbury that played a lot of SST stuff. One reason why I'm never going to get rid of this one is because it has a mention of the great Daryl Ort. His actual last name, Daryl Ort, O-H-R-T. Ort is out. That's probably from when Daryl retired from doing live radio, but you know what? God bless you, Daryl Ort. You turned us on to a lot of great stuff. So yeah, for the WXCI library, when they were liquidating their vinyl back in the dark days of the 90s, I got this mofo. I ain't parting with it. Other quality stuff, and this is just to show you why SST was so loved at the time, because they just couldn't do wrong, man. This is another one of those records that was very divisive. A lot of people didn't like it, but those who did loved it. And the story behind this one is very clean and very clear and very direct. I was working at Open Books and Records in North Miami Beach, Florida, sometime around 1985, and one of the SST promo packs came in the mail with their new releases. And one of them looked very intriguing. St. Vitus. Y'all probably can't see this, but that is embossed silver lettering on the front cover. It is raised, it is actually imprinted directly into the cover. And on the back, a very grainy, blurry, yet defining photo of the band. Bands did not look like this in 1984, 85. That, my friends, you're looking at the epitome of uncool. I cannot stress to you again how uncool this record and this band was at the time. People mocked these guys. They ridiculed these guys for looking like this and for sounding the way they sounded. I'm not joking. I was there. I remember well. I played the promo copy that we got and fell in love with it immediately. Just loved it. What an absolute masterpiece of metal sludge this record is. Same deals with My War. Side 1 I think is perfect. Side 2 I think kind of drags, but whatever. I'll play side 1 over and over and over again until the day they finally carry me out. I love this record. And it's kind of the same deal. Whether you liked it or not, it was a quality product by a band who really meant it and who went out on the road and played that music relentlessly. And it was on SST, baby. Besides, never mind the embossed cover. Just look at the graphics on this label. You know, it's got the standard SST graphic setup with that huge St. Vitus logo, beautifully placed so that it's too big for the label. You know, that makes a statement, man. That really does. That is a graphics masterpiece. Love it. Black on black with silver. This is SST at the peak of its power. A little while later, they released an SST 12-inch single of St. Vitus. St. Vitus doing Black Flag, Thirsty and Miserable. This is actually a sealed stock copy. This one is for sale, by the way. I'm willing to let this one go. If anybody wants this sealed original stock copy, talk to me. Message me. I'll be happy to hook you up if the price is right. Don't worry, I'll take care of that department. So SST is riding high, baby. They are riding high. 84, 85, even going into 86. SST are just firing on all cylinders. They're batting 1,000, kicking ass, and taking names. And I'm going to take a moment now in this narrative because, as you can probably guess, there's a little bit of foreshadowing going on here. The story is about to change ever so slightly. Let's check the monitor and see who's saying what. Let's see. We got Dan. We got Malice von Kreitz, Philip, Amy, Ms. Gelman is still with us, Michael, Nick, another Dave, JC. Jeff Clayton asks, when did the TV party I've Got to Run 7-inch come out? Yes, before My War. That was the last record to come out on SST/Unicorn before all the lawsuits started flying. God damn, it's a great record too. The B-side of that single with I've Got to Run and My Rules. I think that's 2 songs that clock in at about 2 minutes and 50 seconds, and that is Adrenaline Rush. The classic 5-piece lineup with Bill Stevenson on drums. Oi! Track that one down, kids. You need it. I wish I would show you my copy, but I didn't bring it with me today. Anyway, I digress. 1986. We've reached 1986, a pivotal year. SST can still do no wrong. Black Flag's releasing on average of 2 albums a year. Black Flag goes out on tour in January of 1986. And then Black Flag breaks up. In June of 1986, Black Flag broke up. And that, in my opinion, and by my estimation, and as I observed it, is where the rot started to set in the flagship. Because Black Flag and the people in Black Flag really were the driving force behind SST. You know, they were the ones, like, for example, if there was a Black Flag tour happening, it was SST people who would get on the phone at 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever, California time, so they could start calling the East Coast people at 9 o'clock East Coast and just start Just work the phones all day long, calling, calling, calling. Promoters, magazines, newspapers, TV stations, fanzines, anybody who would help promote the upcoming Black Flag tour. And by default, the upcoming Black Flag album. And by default, the bands who were touring with Black Flag. The SST machinery was working double overtime on high gear to promote what Black Flag was doing. And as they would say, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats. So if Saccharine Trust is touring with Black Flag, they benefit. That's really the best name I can think of right off the top of my head, because here's a critical point. The other bands who also toured a lot with Black Flag, such as the Meat Puppets, the Minutemen, Husker Du, and Husker Du did not tour that much with Black Flag, if they even toured at all with Black Flag. They might have played some shows with them. But those bands all would work it themselves. Husker Du were cut from the same cloth as SST. They would work it when they had an album coming out or a tour coming out. They approached their band in a very business-like fashion, and they were just as fearless when it came to working night and day to make people know that they were on tour and that they had a new record coming out. They would do interviews for 10 hours a day. They would go out and drive 15 hours from one venue to the next and give a kick-ass show no matter what. The Meat Puppets would do the same thing. The Minutemen would do the same thing. So when you had all these forces working in concert to promote these bands and these records, you really couldn't lose. But when Black Flag lost steam and broke up, all of a sudden a band like, say, Saccharine Trust, who were really good, you know, good band for sure, but they didn't really tour. They, as far as I know, and people please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but to the best of my knowledge, Saccharine Trust never actually toured full on as a headliner. They might have done West Coast dates, excuse me, but I am pretty sure that they never actually went out and did their own touring, either as a headliner or opening for anybody but Black Flag. And because of that, they didn't have anybody relentlessly working the phones and working the press to let them know that Saccharine Trust was this band who were on SST and had all these records out. So Saccharine Trust sort of kind of faded away. They weren't quite the name brand that they were when they were touring with Black Flag a couple times a year and having their name put out there constantly. They just didn't have that push anymore. And that kind of leads to the next element of why SST's star kind of faded a little bit and fell down a little bit at this time, because SST was still relentlessly releasing albums by Saccharine Trust. But SST weren't going to get on the phone and work a Saccharine Trust album the same way they were going to work a Black Flag record. They just didn't do that. They didn't get on the telephone banks and work Saccharine Trust 10 hours a day. They worked like the way they worked Black Flag. And Saccharine Trust weren't out there touring the same way that Black Flag did. So you're in a record store and, you know, you're getting a solicitation to carry the new Saccharine Trust record. And you're like, yeah, sure, Saccharine Trust, love them. Saw them play with Black Flag last year. They got a new album out? Cool, I'll bring it in. You'd bring it in, and it would sit there. And, you know, nobody would buy it. They'd be like, oh, Saccharine Trust, cool, I remember them, and put it down. You know, because Saccharine Trust, as cool as they are definitely an acquired taste. You really have to be in the mindset to like what Saccharine Trust was doing, which was very avant-garde, very jazz-influenced, very beat poetry-influenced. And they had a couple of albums in a row, We Became Snakes and World Broken specifically, that were excerpted from long jam sessions. And you can tell they're jams. You know, like the songs would fade up in the middle and then fade out with the music still going. And in my opinion, to my ear, that was kind of a turnoff. You know, because They're just jams. Maybe they were great jams, I don't know, but they just sounded like jams. And that leads to another band on SST that kind of had the same factor, if you will, working against them. And I touched a raw nerve with this one, I think, when I posted the SST divider card for October Faction. Got a lot of reaction to the October Faction. October Faction was a jam band that consisted of Greg Ginn, Chuck Dukowski, Tom Tricoli, and I think it was Greg Cameron, the drummer for SWA, with other people coming and going. And they toured with Black Flag a couple of times. And I remember very well seeing October Faction play at a venue called Flynn's on Miami Beach, Florida, when October Faction opened for Black Flag. I think it was in April of '84. My first reaction when these guys shambled onto the stage was, oh, wow, look, Dukowski. Oh, wow, that's Greg Ginn. Dude, they're on stage together. Wow, that's pretty cool. So, wow, go up to the front of the stage and let's look at these guys. I don't know who the other two dudes are, but wow, it's Greg Ginn and Chuck Dukowski in a band together, just like the original Black Flag. Awesome. So they'd get into their shtick. They'd start launching their jam, and they'd be jamming away, and after a few minutes, you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool, I guess. And they would just keep jamming away and jamming away. And after a while, it's like, all right. I wonder if Jill showed up yet. Where is she? Oh, hey, look, there's Paul. Hey, man, the music just, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. It wasn't that great. It was just a bunch of dudes up there jamming. And there's a big difference between a bunch of dudes up on stage just jamming and a group of musicians who know how to improvise together. And I was listening to some October Faction earlier today just to see if my memory was correct. And I'm going to say my memory was correct. It sounded like 4 or 5 strangers on a stage just kind of going off for a while, as opposed to someone like, say, Ornette Coleman and his musicians who knew how to improvise and to work together as an improvising unit. So where does that lead? How does that relate to SST Records? Well, because SST would released a couple of October Faction records. And it was kind of the same deal, You'd be solicited to buy this October Faction record from SST. You'd bring it in, kind of remembering that they opened up for Black Flag, but nobody would buy it. Nobody wanted it because people remembered that it was just basically these guys just kind of jamming. And SST would usually also send out promo copies of these things, which you would play in the store, and in the case of October Faction, hear a bunch of guys jamming and not really going anywhere, just kind of noodling around for a half hour, and you might make it through 1 or 2 songs and say, okay, that's very nice, and then stick it in the used bin for $4 or $5 where it would sit. So you've got a used October Faction record and a new October Faction record sitting in the bins, gathering dust. And that's yet another reason why SST's star began to fall a little bit, because SST, and I'm going to elaborate on this more in a couple of minutes, SST never really released albums. They just kind of tossed them out there and would let them sink or swim. And I'll reiterate, unless you had that team of people relentlessly working it to the press and relentlessly working it to radio, and, SST, to the best of my knowledge, never got any reviewers on a jet plane and flew them down to Rio to have a lobster dinner with Zoogz Rift, for example. I don't think Zoogz Rift ever sat down with a journalist over a lobster dinner at a fancy restaurant in Rio de Janeiro and gave him a scintillating interview, which is why Zoogz Rift never got any good press, and which is why Zoogz Rift records never really went anywhere. Not to mention the fact that Zoogz Rift is definitely an acquired taste. And SST was releasing tons of stuff like this. And I'll backtrack just a little bit. SST, after the breakup of Black Flag, signed some top-shelf, kick-ass, killer bands. I'm talking about Dinosaur Jr. I'm talking about the Bad Brains. I'm talking about Sonic Youth, to name three. Maybe I missed one or two, but those were like the big three on SST for a long time. You couldn't go wrong with those bands. But it's kind of the same deal. Maybe not the Bad Brains so much, but Sonic Youth and Dinosaur Jr. came to SST with certain things in place like management, publicity, maybe their own booking agents, maybe, I'm not too sure about that, but these were bands who worked it themselves. These were bands who never got tired of doing interviews. These were bands who would do radio promos. These were bands who would pose for pictures. These were bands who would tour relentlessly. So the fact that they were hard-working bands releasing kick-ass albums, and they were on SST, same deal. You can't lose. So because of that, because you've got these bands on SST, and at the time, the Black Flag catalog in its entirety, Husker Du, Meat and Puppets, Minutemen, Descendants, SST was selling boatloads of records. They were selling records by the ton. And they were making a lot of damn money. And because of that, they were able to finance the release of lots of records by Zoogz Rift, who at best is an acquired taste, and who, to the best of my knowledge, never toured, and to the best of my knowledge, didn't do much in the way of interviews. So, okay, yeah, he's a great musician and a brilliant composer, and Greg Ginn loved him a lot, and he's got 8 or 9 albums, and SST wanted to release them all, and they could afford to. Great, wonderful. But who's going to buy them? Who's going to buy them? And I remember very clearly getting all these promo albums from SST, like for Zoogz Rift, for example. I'd play them, and, you know, as much as I love Zoogz Rift, I can only take so much. I kept my copy of Island of Living Puke. And we'd stick the other promos in the bin for $4 or $5, where they would sit. Why did they sit there? Because SST wasn't working it as relentlessly and nonstop as they worked Black Flag and Black Flag's fellow travelers. And it's an acquired taste, and there's only so much market for an album called Island of Living Puke with a guy who looks like that and who has songs like Discover Downtown Patterson. I mean, you know. But the thing is, SST just kept cranking them out. And to reiterate what I said before, they didn't release them so much as just kind of throw them out there. And you know for a damn fact that if you're going to go to press with a SWA record, SWA, Chuck Dukowski's band, you got to press at least 1,000 in order to make it cost effective. Bare minimum. You got to press 1,000. And SST at this point is up to catalog number 238. That's 238 releases on the SST label. Okay? Think about that. 238 records on SST. Minimum, I'm going to speculate, of 1,000 each. Right? Just to make it cost effective. That's 238,000 records, my friends. That is a lot of money to spend on pressing. And if the records ain't selling, that's a lot of money tied up in unsold inventory. And I say that from the supply side. First at Open Books and Records, and then at my own record store, Trash American Style. And here, for me, is where it got extremely thorny. This is where I have my beef and my grudge against SST. Hope you're ready for this. Hope I am. And by the way, this is around the same time that SST was sending out these groovy custom dividers. And as far as they go, they're pretty cool. Each divider's got the complete catalog by the artist in question. And you stick it in the bins. I know that at my record store we never used these things because they didn't. They were yellow and they were short and they were weirdly shaped and they didn't fit in with all the other dividers I had. So I just stuck them in the back room and never used them. Another problem. So, they were doing something, but it wasn't the same as flying the journalistic team down to Rio to wine and dine SWA. Okay, so for a long time, the only way to get SST product was through a distributor. When I had my record store, the main distributors were Caroline, Dutch East India, Important, Subterranean, Revolver, Twin City Imports. These were one-stop distributors who either carried labels exclusively, or carried labels that were specialized so much that, like, you couldn't order, well, for example, 10 copies of a SWA record, but you could order one. And you could order one copy of SWA, and one copy of Zoogz Rift, and one copy of Leaving Train, whatever. You'd order one of each of a whole bunch of different titles on different labels and get one big box of records. So for a long time, you could only get SST stuff through a third-party distributor. Now, anybody who's been in the business can sing you the distributor blues, man. Distributors were quite notorious for not wanting to pay the labels, not wanting to pay the bands, and a lot of times they would go out of business, owing a lot of people a lot of money. And you could probably make a list of labels that went out of business because of that, of bands that had to give up because of that, of record stores that were hurt badly because of that. It is a sordid, ugly story. And I know SST took a few hits because of that. I think of some distributors who went out of business owing a lot of people money. I think of Gem. I think of Green World. I think of Systematic. A few other smaller ones, but those were like 3 big ones that went out of business and owed a lot of people a lot of money. And sometimes these labels wouldn't even get their inventory back. It could be a real tough go if you were relying on distributors to get your stuff out and the MFs went out of business. So SST definitely took a few hits from that. They regrouped and started selling directly to stores, which to me was fantastic because I always preferred to deal direct. I would always rather buy the records directly from the label or directly from the band. Send, let's say, 76% Uncertain from Connecticut. Send them a check for X number of dollars. They would send me a box of records. Done. No worries. I got the product. They got the money. Done. Nice and easy. So SST started dealing like that. I remember getting a call one day from SST saying, hey, we're dealing direct now. Just buy from us. Everything you buy is 100% returnable. So go nuts. And I said, all right, cool. I will do so. So I started buying SST releases directly from them on a 100% return basis, which is very simple. It means if it doesn't sell, you can send it back and get credit on another order. So it works very well for the bands because if this SWA record is 100% returnable, I'll take a chance on it, knowing that if I bring it in and nobody buys it, I can just send it back. No biggie, no risk, no muss, no fuss. So I did that. I bought a bunch of the staples, the Black Flag and the Dinosaur and the Meat Puppets and the Minutemen and, even boutique bands like Saccharine Trust or Overkill or whatever. And I would take chances on stuff like Leaving Trains and SWA and Zoogz Rift and, whatever else, knowing that if I didn't sell them, I could send them back. No risk. Now, remember what I said earlier, bands like SWA were not getting the giant push and didn't have the rep that the other bands had. SWA were not a touring machine. They did not work the interviews and the media relentlessly. So I'd bring in a SWA record, and it would sit there because nobody knew who they were. They were vaguely aware that it was Chuck Dukowski's new band. So what? Are you going to spend $8.95 on it just because it was Chuck Dukowski's old band? No. So the records would sit there. And for a while, it worked out pretty well because I would just round them up, ship them back, and get credit on my next order. So one day, I rounded up a bunch of unsold SST stock, and I called up SST, and I spoke to Chuck Dukowski himself. I said, hey, Duke. I don't think I called him Duke, but you know what I mean. I said, hey, I've got some returns. He said, oh, you know what? We're doing returns differently now. We're doing returns now through distributors. Call up one of your distributors, because they all carry SST, and they'll take the return, and we'll just accept all returns through them from now on. And I thought, okay, it's a little bit weird. I don't know why they would do it. I don't know why they would accept a bunch of stuff that I didn't buy from them in the first place, but all right, whatever, I don't know. So I remember I wrote to my distributor at the time, Dutch East India, who always carried SST stuff. I forget if I called them or wrote them. I seem to remember that I faxed over a list. How's that, a fax? I faxed them a list of stuff I wanted to return, and never heard anything from them. Normally, if you faxed a list of returns to your distributor, they would write you back via fax and give you a return authorization number. You would box the stuff up, put that number on the outside of the box, ship it back, and get your credit. I heard nothing from them. So I called my sales rep at Dutch East India and said, hey, what's up, man? I sent you guys a fax about some SST returns. They said, yeah, we're not doing SST returns. I said, okay, that's odd. So I called up SST and spoke to someone again. I think it was Dukowski a second time. I'm pretty sure it was Dukowski a second time, and said, hey, man, what's going on with these returns? He said, no, we're still working it out. It'll happen. Just have patience. Send them another fax in a week or so, and we'll get it all straightened out. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to roll my eyes a little bit now because I've been in the business long enough by then to know how these things go. Whatever. I waited a week, sent Dutch East India another fax, no reply, called them a few days later and said, hey, what's up with these returns? They said, we're not taking SST returns. I don't know what you're talking about. You have to talk to SST about returns. They're the ones responsible for their returns. I said, okay. Called SST, no answer. Called them again, left a message, no reply. Now I see where this is going. Probably tried to call them once or twice after that, never got a reply. And that was the end of that. I had a great big box full of SST albums that I paid for. I paid cash on the barrelhead for these records, with the guarantee that they would be 100% returnable, and lo and behold, all of a sudden, they're not returnable anymore. That kind of burned my sugar cane. I did not appreciate that one bit. Because what am I going to do now with all these Confront James records and all these Gone records and all these SWA records and all these Zoogz Rift records, you know? Nobody's buying them. For all the reasons I just mentioned earlier, nobody's buying them. What do I do with them? Nothing. I do with them what I do with all my other dead stock, and stuck them in the back room and hoped the mice wouldn't eat them. And that was that. I was burned by SST. Burned. And I saw an interview with Chuck Dukowski recently where he actually talked about that, and he said that that was around the time that he quit SST. And he said, he didn't say it in so many words, but he basically said that's why he quit SST. Once he found out, in his own words, what was going on with these returns and stuff like that, he bailed. Whatever. I hope that's exactly the way it went down. I do. I really do. All I know is that I got stuck for several $100s while he's unsold SST records. And it was, of course, it was right around that time that word started making the rounds that SST was not paying their artists for record sales. That was the word on the street, and it was coming from a lot of different directions. From many different directions. I was hearing from people in the biz and people in the bands and people around the bands that SST was not paying. And in retrospect, I could perhaps see why SST wasn't paying bands royalties. Because how else are you going to pay for 238,000 pressed records, you know? You got to rob Peter to pay Paul. But you shouldn't be robbing Peter if you couldn't pay Paul in the first place. Not a way to do business, in my opinion. So the word was getting around that SST wasn't paying their royalties, and that's when bands started jumping ship. You know, a lot of the bands I mentioned before actively worked to regain control of their catalog, which is why Sonic Youth are no longer on SST. That's why the Meat Puppets are no longer on SST. You know, that's why Dinosaur Jr. are no longer on SST. There are probably a few other examples that I can't think of right now, but they're not on SST anymore. And I just think it's very interesting that there's this kind of line of demarcation between the bands who are still on SST and bands who are no longer on SST. The bands who are still on SST, such as the Minutemen, Husker Du, the Bad Brains, they all signed to SST kind of earlier in the game. And the bands who got away from SST signed a little bit later in the game. And I'm going to guess probably had a better understanding of what to put into a contract and what rights to retain, you know, and maybe better legal representation. I'm just guessing. Like, I have not read any of the books on the subject. I haven't listened to any of the podcasts on the subject. I'm just speculating. But that's kind of the way it seems to me. Like, I've talked to people who were involved with Husker Du. Their catalog to this day is still on SST, and that's a big sore point with the Husker Du organization. And I asked this dude point blank, I said, why are their records still on SST? And he said, man, we tried. He said, Husker Du have tried to get off SST. They hired the same lawyers that the other bands hired, and they couldn't get it done. That must have been some sucker contract they signed. I've read interviews with Daryl Jennifer from the Bad Brains, who have embarked on their own reissue campaign. They got the rights to all of their records back, except the SST ones. They probably signed a contract very similar to Husker Du's. And Daryl Jennifer was definitely somewhat aggrieved over the fact that SST was not letting the Bad Brains have the rights to Eye Against Eye, specifically so that the Bad Brains could reissue them. So it's a thorny subject. It's a very thorny subject. And it's because of stuff like that that SST's reputation sort of started swirling in the bowl. And then you had Greg Ginn's behavior towards former members of Black Flag and his attitude about certain things. And people really just didn't like SST anymore. And that's just kind of where it has stood for a very long time. And it's really sad because SST at one time really had it. And now they've got a catalog of old records which I've noticed the price of which continues to rise, even though none of these records have ever been reissued, never been remastered or repackaged or improved in any way, shape, or form. This Black Flag record looks the same way it did when it was reissued. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. According to the members of the band, they've never been paid their royalties on any record ever sold by Black Flag. Keith Morris has said it. Henry Rollins has said it. They've all said that they have never been paid royalties ever. So the packaging has never changed. The royalty situation has never changed. But the prices keep going up and up and up and up. That's one reason I don't like SST anymore. There's no reason for it. I mean, obviously prices are going to go up, but I would think incrementally, not exponentially. In my book, that ain't too cool. So you've got all these factors, man. All these factors as to why SST is no longer the loved and revered entity that it once was. That's one man's opinion. That's me stating it. That's the way I've seen it. That's the way I've observed it. And that's the way the people who are involved with the story have told it. So there you go. That, my friends, is a lot of damage. By the way, this is a factory-sealed colored vinyl edition of Damaged from the early 90s. It's for sale if you want it. Talk to me. It ain't going to be cheap, but it's pretty effing cool. Sealed original colored vinyl from the early 90s. Kind of like this sealed original copy of the All Shreen 10-inch. Kind of like this sealed original copy of All Breaking Things on the Cruise label. I want to sell these things. I want people to buy them. So talk to me. Send me a message. Let me know if you want them. If you got the ducats, I got the vinyl. And that, my friends, wraps up this issue of Tent Talks Tunes. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to my opinions. I do appreciate it. I've seen a lot of comments come through. I'll be checking them out later on the Facebook. If you're watching this archived episode on YouTube, once again, please leave your comments. I love reading them. I like to respond to them and get the dialogue going and keep the discussion flowing. It's fun. So, I do intend to be back in about 167 hours' time. Until we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State.